The research vessel Horizon Dawn drifted silently through the star-filled void, its white hull gleaming under the light of a distant sun. Captain Jin Su stood at the command center, his hands clasped behind his back, as he studied the holographic display before him. "Captain," called out the sensor operator, her fingers dancing across the control panel. "I'm picking up multiple objects dropping out of FTL. Size suggests capital ships." Jin Shu nodded calmly. "Show me." The main display shifted, revealing 5 massive vessels appearing in a perfect formation. Their dark hulls seemed to absorb the starlight, making them look like holes in space. "Dr. Harin to the bridge," Jin Su called over the intercom. He needed his xenobiologist and first contact specialist here immediately. The bridge doors slid open moments later, and Harin hurried in. She was shorter than Jin Su, with short black hair and alert eyes that immediately focused on the display. "New contact?" she asked, already pulling up her data tablet. "Yes." "First impressions." Harin studied the ships carefully. "Design suggests high technological advancement. The formation is too perfect to be civilian. Military, but they're not hiding it. They want us to know." The communications officer's console lit up. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission. Text and video." "Put it through," Jin Su ordered, straightening his uniform. The main screen flickered, revealing a tall, elegant alien. Its silver-scaled skin caught the light, and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern blinked at them. The alien wore what appeared to be ceremonial armor, decorated with swirling patterns. "Greetings, unknown vessel," the alien spoke in perfect galactic standard. "I am High Elder Enxithal of the Araxian Dominion. You have entered space claimed by our people." Jin Su stepped forward, keeping his posture relaxed but dignified. "I am Captain Jin Su of the Earth research vessel Horizon Dawn. We apologize for any intrusion. Our star charts didn't show this sector as claimed territory." Harin watched the alien's reaction carefully. Her fingers tapped notes into her tablet as she observed the subtle shifts in the High Elder's posture. Something about the way those 4 eyes focused made her uneasy. "A simple mistake," Enxthal said, his voice smooth but containing an edge that didn't match his words. "We would be honored to share correct navigational data, perhaps through a direct interface with your ship's computer." Jin Su smiled politely. "That's very kind, but a standard data packet transfer would be more appropriate for initial contact protocols." Harin's tablet nearly slipped from her fingers. She recognized the predatory shift in the alien's stance, a movement so subtle that most would miss it. The Araxian's upper eyes narrowed slightly, while the lower ones widened. She'd seen similar displays in Earth's apex predators. "Of course," Enxthal replied, his tone now carrying what Harin recognized as barely concealed satisfaction. "We wouldn't want to do anything inappropriate." The way he said the word made Harin's skin crawl. She stepped closer to Jin Su and whispered, "Captain, they're displaying classic predator-prey behavioral patterns. They're treating our caution as weakness." Jin Su gave a slight nod, maintaining his diplomatic smile. "We appreciate your understanding, High Elder. Perhaps we could arrange a proper diplomatic meeting. Our protocols for first contact are quite specific." "Yes, yes," Enxthal said, waving a clawed hand dismissively. "We will send you coordinates for docking with our command vessel." "Thank you, but we would prefer to host you aboard the Horizon Dawn," Jin Su countered smoothly. "As guests of Earth, we would be honored to share our hospitality." Harin watched the alien's reaction carefully. The slight forward lean, the way the scaled ridge along its neck raised slightly, all warning signs she'd been trained to recognize. "Captain," she whispered, "they're not used to prey that sets terms." Jin Su's smile never wavered, but his right hand moved to rest near the emergency protocols panel on his command chair. "We'll prepare appropriate quarters for your delegation. High Elder, when would you like to begin?" As the arrangements were made, Jin Su quietly tapped out a series of commands on his chair's hidden panel. Throughout the ship, security protocols activated silently. Herin continued taking notes, her unease growing with each passing moment. The Araxians were being perfectly polite, but something about their behavior reminded her of ancient Earth documentaries about wolves herding sheep. Herin nodded, already compiling her observations. "They think they're hunting us," she said quietly. "Yes," Jin Su agreed, watching the Araxian ships on the display. "Let's hope they learn about humanity's history with inappropriate behavior before they make a serious mistake." Ambassador Q checked his reflection in the polished surface of the Horizon Dawn's elevator wall. His gray diplomatic uniform was perfectly pressed, every badge and pin exactly where it should be. "Nervous?" Herin asked, standing beside him with her data tablet ready. She had changed from her science uniform into formal diplomatic wear. "Cautious," Q replied, adjusting his collar one last time. Captain Jin Su's report about their first contact behavior was concerning. The elevator doors opened to reveal the reception area. Captain Jin Su was already there, speaking quietly with the security team. The room looked peaceful and welcoming, with comfortable seating areas and elegant displays showing Earth's artistic and cultural achievements. No one would guess that hidden weapon ports lined the walls, or that the beautiful fountain in the center could seal off and become a shield generator in seconds. "They're approaching the docking port," Jin Su announced, turning to face them. "Everyone remember, polite, professional, but stay alert." The docking port's doors slid open with a soft hiss. High Elder Anxithel ducked slightly to enter, his impressive height making the standard doors seem small. Behind him came 4 other Araxians, their ceremonial armor glinting under the room's warm lighting. "Welcome aboard the Horizon Dawn," Ambassador Q said, stepping forward with a slight bow. "We are honored by your presence." Anxthel's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "The honor is ours, to visit such an interesting vessel." His gaze swept the room, lingering on the security officers for just a moment too long. Herin noticed one of the Araxian delegates, wearing slightly different armor markings, scanning the room with sharp, precise movements. "Military training," she noted in her tablet. "They brought a combat specialist to a diplomatic meeting." "Please, let us show you to the conference room," Q said smoothly. "We've prepared a presentation about Earth and our culture." As they walked through the ship's corridors, Herin stayed near the back of the group, observing. The Araxian military officer, Commander Vextil, according to her delegation list, kept looking at what appeared to be a decorative bracelet. Her training suggested it was probably a scanning device. In the conference room, Hugh began his presentation. He showed images of Earth's cities, its natural wonders, and its achievements. When he reached the section about Earth's history, Herin noticed the Araxian's attention sharpen. "Your species has had many wars," Anxthel observed, interrupting a section about the United Nations. "Yes," Q acknowledged. "But they taught us the value of peace and diplomacy." Commander Vextil made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Peace through weakness." The room grew quiet. Jin Su's hand twitched slightly toward his command pad. "Peace through choice," Q corrected gently. "We find it more appropriate than constant conflict." Herin watched Anxithel and Vextil exchange glances. There it was again, that predatory look, now tinged with something like contempt. "Speaking of choices," Anxthel said, his voice smooth as silk, "we would be honored if you would continue this discussion aboard our vessel. Our scanning devices suggest your ship's power systems are struggling. We would hate for any unfortunate accidents to occur." Herin's fingers flew across her tablet. The Araxians had been scanning their systems this whole time. A serious breach of diplomatic protocol. "That would be inappropriate," Q said calmly, but with a firmness that made Herin look up sharply. "We appreciate your concern, but our systems are functioning perfectly." Anxthel's neck ridges rose slightly. "You misunderstand. We insist. And we politely decline," Jin Su said, stepping forward. Perhaps we should take a brief recess to review proper diplomatic protocols. The Araxians stood, their movements suddenly more aggressive. Yes, Engstthal said, no longer bothering to hide the edge in his voice. We will return to our ship and send you the proper protocols for your immediate compliance. As the delegation left, escorted by security, Herin hurried to Q and Jin Su. Their behavior patterns have shifted completely. They're no longer hiding their dominance displays. They think they have us cornered, Jin Su said quietly. Should we tell them about Earth's military capabilities? Herin asked. Q shook his head. Not yet. Let's see how they respond to diplomatic warnings first. If they're as intelligent as their technology suggests, they'll research what happens when humans start saying things are inappropriate. And if they don't? Herin looked worried. Then they'll learn why humanity survived all those wars they're so interested in, Jin Su said, already sending quiet alerts to his crew. The hard way. Herin sat in her office aboard the Horizon Dawn, surrounded by holographic displays showing historical data about first contact situations. Her eyes were tired from hours of research, but she couldn't stop. Something about the Araxians' behavior patterns seemed familiar. Her computer chimed with an incoming message. It was from the Araxian ship, demanding access to the Horizon Dawn's cargo holds for routine inspection. This was the 5th such demand in the past 12 hours. Computer, pull up Earth's historical diplomatic incidents, she said, rubbing her eyes. Focus on cases where the phrase inappropriate was used before major conflicts. The screen filled with examples. Herin leaned forward, her tiredness forgotten. Oh no, she whispered. The office door slid open, and Ambassador Q walked in. He looked worried. Dr. Herin, we need your analysis. The Araxians are becoming more aggressive. I was just researching that, she said, turning her display so he could see. Look at this pattern. In human diplomatic history, when we start using words like inappropriate, it's usually a last warning before things get serious. Q studied the data. The incident of 2157, the Mars colony crisis, the Jupiter station standoff. You're right. But why don't the Araxians see it? Because they're predators, Herin explained, pulling up new images. Look at their evolutionary history. They developed from pack hunters. To them, polite warnings are signs of submission. The ship's intercom crackled. Ambassador Q and Dr. Herin to the bridge immediately. Captain Jin Su's voice was calm but firm. When they arrived at the bridge, they found Jin Su watching a new message from High Elder Engstthal. The Araxian leader's silver scales seemed to shimmer with barely contained anger. Your continued refusal to accept our protection is an insult to the Araxian Dominion, Engstthal was saying. We demand immediate compliance with our reasonable requests. Jin Su paused the message. They've positioned 2 warships on either side of us. Commander Vextil is demanding we power down our shields for safety inspections. Captain, Herin said, pulling up her research on a nearby screen. I think I understand what's happening. The Araxians have never encountered a species that uses understatement in diplomacy. They think our politeness means we're weak. Show me, Jin Su ordered. Herin displayed her findings. In their culture, warnings are always direct and aggressive. A strong species would threaten violence. A weak one would submit. But we're doing neither, and it's confusing them. Can we explain this to them? Q asked. I tried, Herin said. I sent them cultural information packets about Earth's diplomatic history. But she checked her computer. They haven't even opened them. Of course not, Jin Su said grimly. They think they've already figured us out. The message from Engstthal continued playing. We will give you 1 standard hour to comply. After that, we will be forced to take corrective action. Should we show them our weapons now? Asked the weapons officer. No, Q said, studying the Araxian ships on the display. Let's try one more diplomatic warning. Maybe they'll finally check those historical records. Jin Su nodded, and opened a channel to the Araxian command ship. High Elder Anxithal, this is Captain Jin Su. Your threats and attempts to force an inspection are highly inappropriate. We strongly suggest you reconsider your actions. He-Rin watched the Araxians' response on her behavioral analysis screen. Their body language showed triumph. They thought they were winning. Your weak protests are noted, Commander Vextil replied, stepping into view beside Exthal. Prepare to receive our inspection teams. After the transmission ended, He-Rin turned to Jin, Su, and Q. They're going to try to board us, aren't they? Yes, Jin Su said, already entering commands into his console. Throughout the ship, hidden defense systems hummed to life. Send an emergency message to Earth Command. Tell them the Araxians need a lesson in human diplomatic terminology. The nearest human fleet is 3 days away, Q reminded them. That's fine, Jin Su said, his voice still calm. We can teach them the meaning of inappropriate ourselves if we have to. He-Rin looked at her research one last time. There's an old Earth saying they should have researched. Beware the anger of a patient man. Or in this case, Q added, watching the Araxian ships move into attack positions, beware the species that warns you politely. The bridge crew worked quietly, preparing for what was coming. Outside, the stars shone peacefully, unaware that they were about to witness a valuable lesson in human diplomatic relations. The warning alarms on the horizon dawn began to sound as 5 small Araxian ships detached from their mother vessel. Captain Jin Su watched them approach on the main screen, their sleek forms moving with clear purpose. Boarding craft, the tactical officer reported. They're heading for our docking ports. He-Rin stood at her station, fingers flying across her console. Captain, I'm detecting energy signatures consistent with cutting tools. They're planning to force their way in if we don't open the doors. Jin Su pressed the ship-wide communication button. All hands, prepare for unauthorized boarding attempt. Activate security protocols, Delta 7. Throughout the ship, hidden panels slid open in the corridors, revealing defense turrets and shield generators. Crew members moved quickly to their emergency stations, their faces serious but calm. Ambassador Q stepped onto the bridge, his diplomatic uniform now replaced with standard ship gear. They're really going to do this, aren't they? Incoming transmission, the communications officer announced. Commander Vextil's face appeared on the screen. His silver scales seemed to glow with triumph. Human vessel, power down your shields and prepare for inspection. Resistance will be met with appropriate force. Jin Su stood from his captain's chair, his voice level and controlled. Commander, forcing your way onto our vessel would be highly inappropriate. This is your final warning. Vextil made a sound like grinding metal. An Araxian laugh. You still try to sound diplomatic. Your weakness is almost embarrassing. The transmission cut off. He-Rin checked her sensors. The boarding craft are almost here. Wait, I'm detecting weapon signatures powering up on their main ships. They're not even trying to hide their intentions anymore, Q observed. Jin Su nodded. Signal the engine room. Prepare for emergency maneuvers. The first boarding craft reached the main docking port. Metal scraped against metal as they tried to force a connection. Warning lights flashed across the tactical display. They're attempting to override our airlock controls, He-Rin reported. They're also trying to hack into our computer systems. Jin Su's fingers tapped a sequence into his command chair. Activate countermeasures. Hidden within the Horizon Dawn systems, advanced human cyber defense programs came to life. The Araxian hacking attempts hit walls of code they hadn't expected to find. Sir, the tactical officer's voice rose with urgency. They're powering up their main weapons. On the screen, they could see the massive Araxian warships turning their gun ports toward the Horizon Dawn. High Elder Axthal's voice boomed through the speakers. Your pathetic vessel is surrounded. Submit to our authority now, or we will destroy you. Jin Su looked at Q, who nodded grimly. The time for diplomacy was ending. All hands, Jin Su announced shipwide, prepare for combat operations. The Horizon Dawn's peaceful exterior began to change. Panels that had looked like simple hull plating slid aside, revealing weapon ports. The ship's research sensors reconfigured themselves into military-grade scanning arrays. "They're cutting through the outer airlock door," Herin reported, watching the boarding craft's progress. "Let them," Jin Su said calmly. "Activate the containment fields in all corridors. Seal off sections Alpha through Delta." The Araxians finally broke through the outer door, only to find themselves trapped between the outer and inner airlocks. Warning lights flashed around them as the Horizon Dawn's defense systems activated. "Captain," Herin called out, "I'm picking up energy spikes from their main ships. They're about to fire." Jin Su's voice remained steady. "Target their weapon ports. Defensive pattern Echo 3. The Horizon Dawn's hidden weapons emerged fully, their barrels glowing with power. The Araxian boarding parties, still trapped in the airlocks, could only watch through the windows as their helpless prey transformed into something very different. "Send one last message," Jin Su ordered. Q stepped forward to deliver it. "Araxian vessels, your actions have gone beyond inappropriate. They are now hostile. We will respond accordingly." On the main screen, they could see the Araxian commanders' expressions change as they finally realized their mistake. The weak human vessel had dozens of weapon ports trained on their ship's most vulnerable points. "Status of the boarding parties?" Jin Su asked. "Contained in the airlocks," Herin reported. "They're trying to retreat, but our security fields are holding them in place." "Send them the historical data again," Jin Su ordered. "This time, I think they'll read it." The bridge crew watched as the Araxian ship's weapons powered down. Sometimes, Herin thought, the best way to teach a lesson was to demonstrate it. The tension on the Horizon Dawn's bridge grew as the Araxian warships hung in space, their weapons still aimed at the human vessel. The trapped boarding parties remained sealed in the airlocks, their cutting tools now silent. "They're trying to access our communication array," Herin announced, watching her displays carefully. "The attempt is coming from their main ship." Jin Su frowned. "Block their access." "Already done, but..." Herin's fingers flew across her console. "They're not trying to hack it anymore. They're, Captain." Energy spike. A beam of bright energy shot from the nearest Araxian warship, striking the Horizon Dawn's communication array. The whole ship shuddered slightly. "Damage report," Jin Su ordered, his voice tight but controlled. "Long-range communications are offline," the tactical officer reported. "They've disabled our ability to call for help." Ambassador Q stepped forward. "This action is absolutely inappropriate. High Elder," he said into the still-functioning short-range communicator. "You've crossed a line." High Elder Axthel's face appeared on the main screen, his 4 eyes gleaming with what he thought was victory. "No more meaningless warnings, humans. You are alone out here. Your weak diplomatic words cannot help you now." Herin watched the sensor readings with growing concern. "They're moving more ships into position. They think they've trapped us." Jin Su stood from his captain's chair, his movements calm and deliberate. "You seem to have misunderstood something important, High Elder. We weren't using diplomatic language because we're weak." "Then why?" Commander Vextil's voice cut in, heavy with scorn. "Because," Jin Su said, pressing a sequence of buttons on his command chair, "we were trying to be nice." Throughout the Horizon Dawn, hidden systems activated. Panels in the hull slid open, revealing not just weapon ports, but something the Araxians hadn't expected. Row after row of small, sleek objects. "What are those?" Axthal demanded, his confident tone wavering for the first time. "Communication drones," Herin explained, unable to keep a small smile from her face. "Did you really think a human research vessel would have only one way to call for help?" Q stepped forward. "We've been broadcasting this entire encounter. Every threat, every violation of diplomatic protocol, every act of aggression, all of it has been recorded and transmitted. The Araxians watched in shock as dozens of drones launched from the Horizon Dawn, their small forms quickly disappearing into FTL speed. Impossible, Vextil snarled. No communication drone is that advanced. Human ones are, Jin Su said simply. And now every human ship in this sector knows exactly what's happening here. I suggest you check your long-range sensors. Harin's console lit up with new data. Multiple FTL signatures detected, Captain. The nearest human defense fleet has changed course. They'll be here in 20 minutes. The bridge crew could see the moment the Araxians realized their mistake. Nexthal's scales had lost their shine, and Vextil's confident posture had turned rigid with fear. You planned this? Enx, Thal asked. No, Jin Su replied. We tried to prevent it. That's why we kept warning you that your actions were inappropriate. That's why we sent you our historical data. That's why we gave you every chance to back down. The human fleet approaching, Harin added, checking her readings, includes 3 Dreadnought-class warships and their support vessels. Would you like me to send you their specifications? The Araxian leaders looked at each other in growing horror. Their scans had missed so much about the Horizon Dawn. What else had they misunderstood about humans? Your boarding parties are still trapped in our airlocks, Jin Su reminded them. Should we begin discussing terms for their safe return? Terms? Vextil growled, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Yes, Q said, stepping forward again. And this time, I suggest you listen very carefully when we explain what would be appropriate behavior. The Horizon Dawn hung in space, its true nature now revealed. Its weapons remained targeted on the Araxian ship's vital points, while inside the airlocks, the would-be boarding parties were getting their first lesson in why humans used diplomatic language. Send them the historical files again, Jin Su ordered. This time, highlight the sections about what happened to the last group who ignored human warnings. Harin nodded, preparing the data. On her screen, she could see the human fleet approaching rapidly. Soon, the Araxians would learn that humans didn't use polite language out of weakness. They used it to give others a chance to avoid finding out just how strong they really were. Harin stood in the Horizon Dawn's main conference room, surrounded by holographic displays showing Earth's diplomatic history. The Araxian leaders sat across from her, their earlier arrogance replaced by tense attention. Behind them, through the room's large windows, they could see the newly arrived human fleet. Let's begin with the Mars colony crisis of 2157, Harin said, bringing up the first display. The situation might seem familiar to you. The hologram showed another alien species, the Crawl, attempting to force their way into a human settlement. Below the image, text scrolled showing the diplomatic exchanges. Notice the human ambassador's words here, Harin pointed. Your actions are inappropriate. 3 days later, the Crawl lost their entire invasion fleet. High Elder Nexthal's scales shifted uncomfortably. One example proves nothing. Then let's look at more, Harin said calmly, changing the display. The Jupiter Station standoff, the Centauri border incident, the Proxima Convention. In each case, humans used the word inappropriate as a final warning. Commander Vextil leaned forward, his 4 eyes fixed on the data. How many times has this happened? 17 major incidents in the past century, Harin replied. Would you like to know how many of those situations ended peacefully once the other side understood what the warning meant? How many? Nexthal asked quietly. 16. Only the Crawl refused to listen. She paused, letting that sink in. They're not a spacefaring species anymore. Captain Jin Su, who had been watching silently, stepped forward. We're not showing you this to threaten you. We're showing you because you need to understand why we communicate the way we do. Ambassador Q nodded. Humans learned long ago that shouting threats usually leads to violence. We prefer to give others a chance to step back from the edge. The display changed again, showing Earth's own history. Wars, conflicts, and finally, the development of their diplomatic protocols. Your species evolved from pack hunters, Herin explained. You show strength through direct confrontation. Humans evolved as persistence hunters. She brought up new images. We learned to wait, to warn, to give our prey a chance to tire themselves out. Are you calling us prey? Vex still growled. No, Jin Su said firmly. We're explaining why we try to avoid conflict. Because when we can't avoid it, we're very, very good at finishing it. Herin switched to footage from the crawl incident. The Araxians watched in silence as the technologically superior crawl fleet was systematically taken apart by human ships that had appeared far weaker than they really were. The crawl made the same mistake you almost made, Q said softly. They thought politeness meant weakness. They didn't understand that humans use diplomatic language precisely because we're strong enough not to need threats. Your boarding parties are still in our airlocks, Jin Su reminded them. The human fleet outside has enough firepower to reduce your ships to atoms. But we're still talking, still trying to resolve this peacefully. Do you understand why now? Anxthal's scales had taken on a pale color. Because you don't want to fight. Exactly, Herin said. Fighting is inappropriate when words can solve the problem. The room fell silent as the Araxians studied the historical data. Through the windows, they could see their own ships now surrounded by the human fleet. The size difference was striking. The human vessels were massive compared to the Araxian warships. There's something else you should know, Herin added, bringing up one final display. Remember those communication drones we launched? They didn't just call our fleet. They broadcast everything that happened here to every major species in this sector. The whole galaxy now knows how you chose to introduce yourselves to humanity, Q said. But they also know we're still willing to talk. That's very important for your species' future. Commander Vextil looked at the human ships again, then at the historical data. We may have misunderstood some things about humans. Yes, Jin Su agreed. The question is, what do you plan to do about that misunderstanding? High Elder Anxithal stood slowly. Perhaps we should review those diplomatic protocols you offered earlier. The ones we inappropriately ignored. Herin smiled slightly as she prepared to share the protocols again. Sometimes the best teacher was hindsight, especially when it came with such clear evidence of why humans preferred to give warnings before showing their strength. High Elder Anxithal sat in his private chamber aboard the Araxian command ship, watching message after message arrive from the Araxian Council. Each one made his scales droop further. On the screen before him, recordings of his actions played on repeat. The threats, the attempted boarding, the attack on the human ship's communications. A soft chime announced another visitor. Commander Vextil entered, looking as troubled as Anxthal felt. The other species are responding to the broadcast, Vextil reported. The Galactic Trade Council has called an emergency session. The Diplomatic Alliance wants to review our status. Even our allies are distancing themselves. How? Anxthal demanded. How did we misread this so badly? The door chimed again. This time, it was Ambassador Q and Dr. Herin, escorted by 2 human security officers. May we come in? Q asked politely. We have something to show you. Anxthal waved them in wearily. More historical data about human warnings. No, Herin said, setting up a small holoprojector. This is about your future. The projector came to life, showing a map of local space. Trade routes that had once flowed through Araxian territory were being rerouted. Alliance markers were changing color from green to yellow, showing strained relationships. The galaxy sought everything, Q explained. They saw you ignore diplomatic protocols, attempt forced boarding, and attack a research vessel. But more importantly, they saw how humans responded. With patience, Herin added. With warnings, with a chance to step back. Vextil's neck ridges flattened, a sign of shame in Araxians, and now they all know we ignored those warnings. Yes, Q said, but they also know something else. Show them, Dr. Herin. Herin pressed a button on the projector. New data appeared, messages from various species about the incident. The Araxians leaned forward to read. "Notice what they're focusing on," Herin said. "Not just your actions, but our response. The fact that even with a superior fleet, even after your attacks, we still chose diplomacy. The galaxy is watching," Q explained. "They're waiting to see what happens next. This isn't just about humans and Araxians anymore. It's about what kind of civilization you want to be known as." Anxthal's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep thought. "What are you suggesting?" "We've prepared a joint statement," Q said, producing a datapad. "It acknowledges the cultural misunderstanding that led to this incident. It commits both our species to better diplomatic relations, and it shows the galaxy that Araxians can learn from their mistakes." "You would help us save face?" Vextil asked, surprised. "Even after what we did?" "That would be appropriate," Herin said with a small smile. More messages flashed on Anxthal's screen. The Araxian Council was demanding answers. Their allies wanted explanations. Their enemies were already moving to take advantage of their weakness. "Your fleet," Anxthal said suddenly. "The one surrounding us now. How long has it been in range?" "Since before we first met," Jin Su's voice came from the doorway as he entered. "Those communication drones we launched. They weren't calling the fleet. They were just carrying the broadcast. Our ships were already here, cloaked, watching." The Araxians stared at him in shock. "You mean?" Vextil's voice trailed off. "We could have destroyed your ships at any time," Jin Su confirmed. "But that would have been inappropriate." Herin watched understanding finally dawn in the Araxians' eyes. Humans hadn't used diplomatic language because they were weak. They used it because they were strong enough to choose their responses carefully. "The joint statement," Anxthal said quietly. "May I see it?" As Q handed over the datapad, Herin's sensors picked up movement throughout the Araxian fleet. Weapon systems were powering down. Shields were lowering. The Araxians were finally learning to listen when humans said something was inappropriate. "There's one more thing," Jin Su added, "about your boarding parties. The ones still in your airlocks." Vextil asked nervously. "We've been teaching them about human diplomatic history while they waited," Herin explained. "They've become quite interested in preventing future misunderstandings." Anxthal looked at the joint statement, then at the messages from the galaxy, and finally at the humans who had chosen to help them even after being attacked. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "it's time for the Araxian Dominion to learn some new ways of communicating." The humans smiled. Sometimes the best victories weren't won through force at all, but through the power of choosing not to use it. The main conference room of the Horizon Dawn had changed. Where there had been tension before, now there was a sense of purpose. Herin stood before a mixed group of humans and Araxians, teaching them about how different species communicate danger. "In human history," she explained, pointing to the display, "we learned that the most dangerous predators aren't always the ones that roar the loudest." The Araxian officers, including those who had been trapped in the airlocks, watched with great interest. Their scales now shifted with curiosity rather than aggression. "Here's an example from Earth," Herin continued, showing a video of a small blue-ringed octopus. "This creature is deadly, but it doesn't try to look scary. Instead, it shows these bright rings as a quiet warning." Commander Vextil raised a clawed hand, like humans using the word inappropriate. "Exactly," Herin smiled. "The octopus is powerful enough that it doesn't need to threaten. It just needs to warn." Ambassador Q entered the room, followed by High Elder Anxthal. They carried datapads showing the latest diplomatic agreements between their species. "The Galactic Trade Council has accepted our joint explanation," Q announced. "They're impressed by how quickly we resolved the situation." "Impressed by the humans, you mean?" Anxthal said, but his tone held respect rather than bitterness. "Your species could have destroyed us. Instead, you taught us." Captain Jin Su, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, stepped forward. Teaching is better than fighting. Less cleanup afterward. The room filled with both human laughter and the grinding metal sound of Araxian amusement. It was the first time they had laughed together. "Look at this," Herin said, bringing up new data. "Other species are studying how humans handle diplomatic incidents. They're particularly interested in our warning signs." The display showed various alien diplomats analyzing human diplomatic language. One species had already started using the word inappropriate in their own diplomatic messages. "We're becoming a case study," Q explained. "How to turn a potential war into a peaceful exchange." Vextil looked troubled. "But our warriors, they won't understand this softer approach." "Then show them this," Jin Su said. He pressed a button, and the room's displays changed to show the human fleet surrounding the Araxian ships. But now they revealed something new: detailed scans of the human vessel's capabilities. The Araxian warriors' eyes widened as they saw the true power of the ships that had held back from attacking them. The weapons they hadn't used. The defenses they hadn't needed. Real strength, Jin Su said quietly, is being powerful enough to choose peace. Herin brought up more historical data. "Look at Earth's history. We didn't become peaceful because we were weak. We became peaceful because we were strong enough to learn from our mistakes. Like we're learning now," Engstful said thoughtfully. One of the younger Araxian officers spoke up. "But how do we know when someone is giving us a real warning? How do we tell the difference between weakness and restraint?" "That's what we're here to learn," Herin answered. She showed them more examples from Earth's history: diplomatic incidents, cultural exchanges, and first contact situations. "Notice the pattern," she pointed out. "Strong species don't need to prove their strength constantly. They show it by how carefully they choose their actions." Q nodded. "Think about what happened here. We didn't threaten you. We warned you. We gave you chances to change course. That's not weakness. It's confidence." The Araxians watched as Herin played back recordings of their own actions during the crisis. They could see now how their aggressive responses had made them look not stronger, but less secure. "We're adding new training to our diplomatic course," Engstful announced. "Every Araxian diplomat will learn about human warning signs, about the strength in restraint, and about the importance of listening," Vextil added, "when someone tells us something is inappropriate." Jin Su smiled. "You know what would be appropriate right now? Sharing a meal together. Our chef has prepared a dinner that's safe for both species." As they moved toward the dining area, Herin noticed how differently the Araxians carried themselves now. Their posture was still proud, but it was pride based on understanding rather than aggression. Sometimes, she thought, the best way to show strength was to be strong enough to learn new ways of being strong. 1 month after the incident, the Horizon Dawn floated in space beside a massive new structure. The Joint Human Araxian Diplomatic Academy hung like a shining star between their territories, its design combining the straight lines humans preferred with the flowing curves of Araxian architecture. Herin stood at a podium in the Academy's main hall, facing an audience of both humans and Araxians. Behind her, a large display showed the now famous first contact incident that had led to this moment. "Welcome to the first class of the Joint Diplomatic Course," she began. "You're here because both our species learned something important. True strength lies not in threats, but in warnings." In the front row, Captain Jin Su and High Elder Engstful sat side by side. Their ships, once aimed at each other in battle, now patrolled together to protect the Academy. "Today we'll study 3 things," Herin continued. "First, how to recognize warnings from different species. Second, how to give warnings that others will understand. And third, why sometimes the quietest warnings are the most serious ones." Ambassador Q entered the hall, followed by Commander Vextil. They carried fresh data from their joint mission to update the galactic diplomatic protocols. "The Diplomatic Alliance has officially adopted our new guidelines," Q announced to the Assembly, including the section about understanding cultural warning signs. Vextil stepped forward. 17 species have already requested to join the Academy. They want to learn what we learned. The audience murmured with excitement. The incident that could have started a war had instead created something new, a way for different species to understand each other better. Show them the new first contact protocols, Jin Su suggested. Herin nodded and changed the display. The new protocols showed clear guidelines for recognizing and respecting different species' warning signs. The word inappropriate had its own special section. These protocols aren't just rules, she explained. They're a bridge between cultures. Each species has its own way of saying be careful or step back. Our job is to understand those warnings before they become conflicts. Inksthol rose to address the group. 1 month ago, I thought humans were weak because they didn't make threats. I was wrong. They were strong enough to warn us instead of destroy us. The Araxian leader's scales shimmered with pride, not the old pride of aggression, but a new pride in understanding. Now, he continued, the galaxy sees the Araxian dominion differently. We're not just warriors anymore. We're teachers, helping others understand the difference between threats and warnings. Jin Su joined him at the podium. And humans have learned too. We're better at explaining our warnings now. Clear communication saves lives. Herin brought up one final display, a map of the galaxy showing all the species now participating in the new diplomatic program. This is what happens when we listen to each other, she said, when we turn misunderstanding into knowledge. A young Araxian student raised her hand. But what if someone doesn't listen to warnings? What if they make the same mistake we did? That's why we're here, Q answered. To make sure that when someone says, that would be inappropriate, everyone understands what it means. Vextil nodded. In the old days, I would have laughed at diplomatic warnings. Now I know, the quieter the warning, the more serious it might be. The assembly ended with a ceremony. Human and Araxian leaders together activated the Academy's new beacon, a signal that would broadcast diplomatic lessons and warning protocols to any species that might visit their region of space. Think about it, Herin said to her students as they prepared to leave. 1 month ago, we were ready to fight. Now we're teaching the galaxy how to avoid fights. Jin Su smiled. That seems entirely appropriate. The hall filled with human laughter and Araxian grinding metal sounds. The joke worked in both languages now, just like their warnings. Outside the Academy's windows, the stars shined on human and Araxian ships patrolling together. Their crews had learned to recognize each other's warning signs, to respect each other's strength, and to understand that sometimes the most powerful message is a quiet warning. And somewhere in the galaxy, other species were learning the same lesson. When humans say something is inappropriate, listen very, very carefully.